Hello and welcome to another local flavor painting video. My name is Eric, and today we're going to be talking about taking our underpainting and pushing it into a working stage in a number of ways. Starting off, we need to think about where we want to paint first. Since we've planned the composition, a lot of us are going to want to jump in directly into the structure and start painting. I'm going to tell you to resist the urge. If we can take care of the background first, even if it pushes into the figure, or the structure, it's much easier to edit from the structure out than the other way, or to plan your background around your foreground, around your object, because then your sky is bent in a really weird way. This is the right way to do it. So we're going to be starting with our sky plane, then we're going to be moving into our ground plane, and then we're going to be doing some stuff within the structure. So within the sky, I still have this mixed palette here. I'm going to start going, and one of the good things, and one of the reasons I start with the sky, usually in a landscape or structural painting, is because it's the easiest thing to paint, and it's in the background. There's not going to be anything further away than the sky, so I'm never going to have to paint around it. And it's a good way of just getting something to an almost finished state on your canvas, so you can start seeing what that looks like and start comparing some other areas to that. Some of my paint isn't really mixed all the way. You'll notice that brush stroke had a lot of white at the top and blue at the bottom. I like taking not completely mixed paint sometimes and putting that directly through. Once again, I am going to try and keep this border, but even if it goes into the structure, I'm really not worried about that at this point. We're going to take this and just push it through. And I'm looking for contrast. A lot of people come in and become too stressed out about their source material and how accurate they are becoming or sort of leaving their painting to that source material. It's your painting. You can paint more clouds if you want. It doesn't have to be in the source material. Your source material is sort of a jumping off point into the creative process, where you have to make, well, that's way too bold. It's a way of jumping in, and then you have to make all of those decisions as you're painting. Nobody sees the source material at the end of the painting. Everybody sees the finished quality, the finished painting. So that's what you need to think. What can make this painting better? What's going to balance that? Why am I putting this in? Is it just arbitrary because it exists? Or is it because it makes the painting better? So once again, it's definitely building into the structure as far as the roof here. But my plan is that I'm going to get the sky to about a 90% finished. I'm not really interested in doing too many clouds here. I'll do a couple here at the end, show you a couple little clouds. But other than that, I'm just looking for soft transitions. And as I build up, I don't really have to put any sort of extraneous detail at this point, light clouds or anything like that, unless you really, really want to. Unless there are things building into the structure. So if you mix while it's still wet, you can get nice light things. And I'm still using like a 1.5 inch brush. There's definitely ways of using smaller brushes, a little bit of water. You can get nice transparent things happening in here without committing too much. You can also come in with sort of an off-white or get a little bit of pure white, just a little bit. Maybe like a little bit of a smaller brush here. Throw just little caps on them. Maybe a little Marks from the bottom too. Can be a little bit heavy. That's okay. You can pull it back really easily. So just nice, light things. You don't need to put too much detail at this point. You just want to get it moving to where you can start planning your structure more accurately. Okay, so the sky has been pushed. The opacity is looking pretty good as far as just a coating. This is actually a little bit weird here. I'll touch this up. And then we're going to be going directly, I got too much of that dark. We're going to be going directly into the ground plane. Now the ground plane has been giving me a little bit of an opacity issue as far as the green not really covering up my underpainting as well. But that's okay. Sometimes more layers is better. Rather than putting paint on super thick, I would always rather just put on another thin layer. Ground plane up here, there is some foliage and things up here, but I'm just going to sort of mark it off now. And that one is way better. That's good. That's actually my third pass. Once again, acrylic paint dries very quickly. I would rather you just put a lot of thin layers than get frustrated and come in and put a lot of thick paint. It sort of puts you in a spot that you can't work your way out of with textural elements and other things that are going to confuse your space. So yeah, that cut of green went on nicely. Pull this right in. The brown, I'm a little bit worried too. I feel like that's going to be another one that's going to give me some opacity issues. Might be smarter to bring that green in first, but I'm just going to go straight into that brown. See what happens. Yeah, it's going to take another coat for sure. But that's okay. I'd rather slowly refine my space, one layer at a time, rather than stressing and slowing down the process. And there's a little bit of a walkway here. Maybe I'll do that more in the brick tone. So it's sort of the same tone as that. Okay, so pretty quickly, we're pushing opacity. Already looking better than when we started. Still using that 1.5-inch brush. You should have an inch on your materials list. Or a 2-inch optional. I like somewhere in the middle. Sometimes I like a 2, but it's all good. So now I'm going in. Now that I have the sky and the ground plane, one more pass. I'm going to take another pass on the building and start to refine some of the outsides. Now I'm only going to do this once I am satisfied with the background, because I'm now coming in and trying to define more accurate space. And when people come in and try and do structural lines, a lot of people overthink it and they kind of freak out a little bit. If you really look, this line is not absolutely perfect as far as the straightness. But I'm not really interested in it being perfectly straight. I'm just trying to get the best I can. And my biggest recommendation on that is to move a little bit faster than you might think. A lot of people come in and they do a little mark, then they take another little mark, and a little mark. It looks very odd that way. If you come in with a little bit of confidence, let your elbow and shoulder kind of control it rather than your wrist. It's not that bad. And you can get a nice, decent structural form there. So there's definitely some value shifts there. This pokes out a little bit further, I think. Minor edits still. If there's still stuff breathing and still stuff kind of finding its form, that's good. Continue to edit as you go. Don't be confined by your underpainting or your drawing. If you see a proportion that needs to be changed, go for it. Especially in this stage. Once again, these lines are not perfectly straight, but that's okay. Some people come in and do tape and other things to really try and get a nice, perfectly straight line. I think for something like this, that's a little bit overdone and unnecessary. There are definitely times to use tape and very specific reasons, but even with straight lines in a structural form, you have plenty of ways of doing it without using tape. So pretty basic there. Once again, I'm just trying to push opacity. At this point, I can start adding minor details. So I'm going to use a little bit of a smaller brush here. I've been using an 1.5 inch. I'm going to use a 1/2 inch. This isn't perfectly dry yet, but I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to go straight into my white. Got a couple doors and other things that are placed within this. So get a little bit of visual perspective here. So we just place it. Load that brush a little bit heavier. Looks like that goes all the way down. And it gets cut off there. So I'd rather place it when it's a little bit wet still, so it kind of mixes with the paint under it and it's not as of a dramatic transition. That pure white sometimes can be very, very bold. Make sure that this line sort of stays parallel with this. A little space there. And then there's a window and sort of another, there's a window over here too. Maybe we'll get one more up here. Also going back, the angle of this one actually looks more like that. Better. And then yeah, the angle of this is very similar in the linear perspective. There are tricks in things like this arch to find center and then to build this form in the center. Most structural forms will have some order to them. It's going back, and then there's one more sort of receded back here. I'm not really trying to paint anything specifically yet. I'm just placing it out. I'll be coming in with more detail and finding these lines of perspective as time goes. Right. Get one more pass going here. Come right on in and get this going. You'll notice that I'm trying to, once again, resist the urge to paint too much detail too early. I'm going to show you a quick demo on how to use a filbert brush for organic elements. And you'll see me use that later in the time-lapse video of me finishing this painting. But really the goal at the beginning is thin, consistent layers that build up your opacity and build up your form slowly, each time a little bit more accurately. And I'll be placing a couple windows here before the end of this video just to show you the same thing. I am saving a little bit of space for them, obviously going over that space, but big to small, back to front. Some people wouldn't even try and block these windows out yet, but I'm a sucker for an underdrawing. Okay, structural form there. Maybe a little bit large, that's okay. Can always work its way back. Don't forget how malleable a painting is. Paint something too large, that can be fixed. Paint something too bold of a color, that can be fixed. As long as you're painting consistent thin layers, you can almost fix anything. Notice I'm moving my hand fairly quickly to keep that thin layer going. So there is a fair amount of iteration within that color palette, which is good. When I look at this brick, there's definitely differences. So to push that further, I might take this and turn it on its side. In a flat brush, this direction would make a larger mark than this would. Just turn it 90 degrees. So if I take it with a more dramatic value and do a smaller section, kind of build it out, maybe getting a little bit larger as it goes towards the foreground. start to get just minor transitions. What you should try and do is you should look for larger areas of value rather than specific details. When I look at this, there's all sorts of details on here on this brick house. Sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. I want to look at the biggest detail I can see. What I would say is that it's a little bit darker in the back than it is in the front. So that's one minor detail I can do there. If I can start to add some of the shapes that I see, some of the larger shapes, adding a deeper value in the back, and then pulling that forward. And then you can see I can start building some lines in there as well as they build up in that direction. And I'll come in and I'll start pushing things more dramatically as I go. Once again, I'm not trying to push anything too dramatically too early. Okay, last thing I think I'm going to paint on this is going to be the roof and some of these windows. I'll tackle a window first. There's a lot of detail in this window. There's sort of a dark value. There's a outline of a white, and then there's dark shutters on the outside. For me, that's too much painting to try and work around subjects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to simplify my painting. I'm going to come and I'm going to paint a larger shape of dark value. And once that dries, I'm going to come back with a white or off-white and then take a highlight around that shape once I paint the larger section of both shutters and the inside of the window. And then after that, I'll come in and I'll paint on top of the window. Once again, big to small, back to front, thin to thick. So I have a nice deep value here. I'm using a 1/2 inch brush for more details. There is one line that's kind of important on this, and that's that linear perspective. That would be actually the top and the bottom. So there actually are two lines that are fairly important on this for it to look accurate. But what I'm going to do is sort of just block these things out. One, two, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5. I think I planned 5. And I'm not really worried about specifics yet. I'm trying to keep verticals vertical and these lines going fairly consistently back. But I'm just placing detail and I'm softening it out to try and reduce the amount of lines that I get in that shape. There will be structural forms, there will be things that need to stay fairly accurate. When that happens, remember that a painting is very forgiving. Even if these aren't perfect right at the beginning, you will have a chance to come back and rework them. So there's 2, then there's the door here, and then there's 2 more here. I'm just trying to get close. Once again, I'm not really trying to get perfect here. If I can get close, I can use them as a guide, and I can build them as I go. It's a little bit like a Looney Tunes house right now. That's all right. The thing I want to encourage you is to not worry too much about your painting as you're painting. As long as you're slowly refining the space, and it's slowly looking more and more like your source material, or like reality, you're doing the right thing. Even if it looks a little bit wonky, that's okay. Okay, so I'm going to continue to push this. This is my second layer of this, so it's going to be more opaque. And that roof is going to come in a little bit better, rather than the first pass of the stuff that I've just done. I still got that 1/2 inch. I probably could have gone back to the 1.5 inches. Should always use the largest brush you feel comfortable with. It saves time, That's the most important thing, is if you're getting the same work done in a shorter amount of time. There are still some windows up here as well. I would rather just build into them as that time comes. They're still blocked out, actually more dramatically than the ones on the side of the house were. But we're just pushing through. So, as far as your first pass, and you're going to see in that time lapse sort of how I attack the rest of this painting. My process of painting, and how I recommend you to paint, is just slow and consistent. This layer is absolutely not perfect. There are things that I don't like about it. There are things that didn't work perfectly. Some of the things weren't placed perfectly. Doesn't matter. I can continue to refine, and I can continue to slowly make this better. As long as I don't sort of freak out and not trust the system, things are going to slowly get better. And as I look at the camera here, I can actually see some of these windows are absolutely not vertical. Doesn't matter. I can come in, I can clean stuff up. Even though I'm working big to small, if I came in and I said, oh, that's not vertical, I can still obviously come in and very easily clean areas up when the time comes. So don't worry too much about that. As far as things not being perfect, I'm going to place a couple more things. This is the doorway here. I'm using a smaller brush again. Coming back. Down. Oh. Yep, I may have to move that. The front door is going to be too large. Again, I'm really not too worried about it. May have to move the doorway as much as like a ½ inch. I'm just going to place it for now though. We can come back and edit it. I just want to start seeing it for what it is. Start looking at it. Start slowly editing it. Okay, then up here, same thing. We're going to loosely place these. Haven't really even waited for it to dry. Gray tone is good. This is going to come up actually as tall or all the way, and it comes back in. We can extend that a little bit. So, trying to plan these windows. Don't care that I'm getting gray value in there. It's easier to see a little bit than a pure white. That's going to be pushed back. So I'll mark this. Same thing here, I'm going to build another one. Try to balance my composition. Maybe a little bit taller, but it's malleable. Grab this and pull this back. There's a little bit of a roof coming back this way too. Gray tone helps me see that is separate from the top. And the inside of the window is a little bit darker. So I'm pushing space, but I'm not really worried about what I'm painting at this point. As I continue to look, this is nowhere near straight enough. Things are not perfect, but that's okay. You want to slowly build the forms, and you want to not be tied down so much to keeping every line perfectly straight. It's one of sort of the beauties of painting, is that it's a forgiving medium. Things can be almost straight, and your eye will read them as straight if they're organically placed. If you use like tape and you almost get it straight and then you don't, sometimes it's actually easier to see your imperfections. But keep it organic. Trust your hand-eye coordination. Don't rely on tape or anything like that. And start to add details. Remember, don't labor in one area too long. Push opacity. And every time you go through, try to tighten it up a little bit. depending on the source and what I'm looking for in a painting, I might take 8 or 10 passes on a painting. Just slowly refining. Each layer is getting a little bit better. I try and add a little bit more. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes I say, ugh, I don't really like that. Doesn't matter. Let it dry. Work in another area. And come back. One of the biggest faults I see in beginner painters, and something you should try and not do, is get stuck in one position for too long. Just trying over and over and over to get one thing to work. There's plenty of other areas to keep developing. Plenty of other things that, that you can continue to push. And then come back to it. Okay? Next video, I'm going to be talking more specifically about finishing this painting. It's going to be actually a time lapse. You're going to see me sort of refining forms, pushing my background elements, and then pushing the space of the building as well.